The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. The Radical. Fundamental. The Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show. It's Thursday. Almost in the week. Almost in. Jesus is finally sitting up all day waiting for me, waiting for the show. All right. Good to see everybody. Good to have everybody here. Let me take this off. I'm not going to be using that, and so that we can just chat today. So today we're going to talk about some of the differences between Europe and the United States. I think it's worth having that conversation, stimulated by as many times happens, by something posted in the Grumpy Economist by John Cochrane about the economic differences between Europe and the United States. But then I thought, what about all the other differences, the cultural differences, the philosophical differences, the birth rate differences, the sense of life differences? So I thought we'd just have a general discussion about the differences and the extent to which Europe is winning. The United States is becoming more and more like Europe rather than the other way around, as I think it was for a while at least. So we're going to jump into that. We're going to talk about that. Don't forget, of course, as you listen to the show, don't forget, if you like the show, don't forget to like it, press the like button. You should subscribe if you're not a subscriber already, and press the bell so that you know when I go live and that is announced. Also, of course, you can use the Super Chat here. Daniel, thank you. Started off the contributions, but you can use the Super Chat to make contribution to support the show and to keep us going. And you can also support the show, of course, on YaronBrookShow.com/support, on Patreon, and Subscribestar, on Locals, pretty much everywhere, even our Venmo. If somebody really wants to use Venmo, there's a Yaron Brook Media. There's a Brook Media thing on Venmo. You can make contributions there. So no excuses. We try to supply every known digital. Well, I don't have crypto yet. It's just too much of a hassle to. Or maybe there is crypto on my website. At some point, we try to get crypto going. So you can also make a contribution by crypto. Okay. I guess you guys already got into it. Europe is not uniform. Well, of course, Europe's not uniform. Neither is the United States, really. The sense of life, the attitude, the politics, the culture of Mississippi are quite different than the culture, politics, attitude, sense of life of California or New York. So there are vast differences across the United States, and there are vast differences across Europe. But I do think you can make some arguments about differences between the U.S. and Europe, at least on average. Although I will say, right off the bat, I think this is true, and I think this is true that the differences between Europe and the United States are shrinking, primarily because the United States is becoming more like Europe, a little bit. Some parts of Europe becoming more like the U.S., but for that, we have to define our terms. What does it mean to be more like the U.S.? What does it mean to be more like Europe? So let's look at a little bit at the differences between Europe and the United States, just on averages. Now, I am going to use as a kind of a proxy for economic success, for economic growth, for economic wealth. I'm going to use GDP. I know GDP is a terrible measure. It's incredibly flawed. It is distorted by monetary policy. It is distorted because it captures consumption, including government spending, so that during war time, often as the standard of living and quality of life are going down, GDP goes up. But I don't know anything better as just a quick capture of a state of economy, and as a proxy, it's not bad. As a proxy, it's not bad. So when you look at things like GDP per capita and you compare it across countries, and since they're all measuring it about the same way, particularly if you adjust for the cost of living, it's called PPP adjustments, then GDP per capita, PPP adjusted, can really give you a sense of the differences in wealth across different countries. Not perfectly at all, but at least a broad sense. One of the things we can look at too is productivity. Now again, GDP factors into this. You can't escape, if you're looking at economic aggregates, you can't escape GDP these days. And until somebody comes up with a better aggregate for economic performance, it's kind of, we're stuck with that. If you look at productivity, I found these graphs really interesting. If you look at productivity per hour worked, the United States and Germany have very similar levels of productivity. The United States used to be a lot more productive on a per hour worked basis than Germany, but that gap has shrunk, and by the mid-2000s, certainly by the late 2000s, it had gone to basically zero, and Germany has slightly higher productivity per hour worked than the United States has in the later part of the 2010s. Again, this is mostly mostly, I think, manufacturing, but generally productivity per hour worked. France is a little below the United States, but fairly high. Italy and the UK quite a bit below. Italy is actually above the UK in productivity per hour worked, which is interesting. So it means that when a worker goes into a plant, a manufacturing plant, Germany, the United States, France, in terms of machinery and capital, are supporting that worker about the same and that level of productivity. And if you take into account education and everything else that goes into making him more or less productive, that worker, they're about equally productive. Right? But then when you look at what's called total factor productivity, you look at just productivity in the economy between these two that takes into account the worker, the worker in terms of its productivity per hour, but also all the other factors that go into, for example, the number of hours the worker actually works. If you take into account, the regulation, the deployment of capital, everything else, right? Then productivity is quite a bit bigger, right? So if you look, US then has the highest productivity, Germany second, France is way behind, Spain way behind France, and Italy is way in the back. Italy, total factor productivity in Italy has actually declined, which is very unusual, over the last 30 years. So in Italy, the Italian economy is less productive today than it was in 1990. That's not true of Germany. It's not true of the United States. It's not true. Well, France's economy has grown, productivity has grown a little bit, but not much. Spain is basically flat. Italy is in the negative territory. Italy productivity in the economy has gone down, right? And that's just stunning. So from a productivity perspective, from a productivity of the economy perspective, the U.S. economy is far superior to almost any economy in Europe. The German economy is the only one that, from a productivity perspective, comes close to the United States and has been close to the United States over the last 30 years. No other economy in Europe is close. I don't think, even if I don't have a graph here for Denmark and Sweden and some of these other countries. Right? But there it is. And you could argue that a lot of that has to do with what? What are the different characteristics of the U.S. and European economies? Again, it's not the quality of the labor. It's not the levels of education. It's not automation, particularly not an economy like Germany. What it is really is regulation. A lot of it's labor regulation. It's what Schumpeter called creative destruction, the ability to shut down businesses, the ability, in a sense, to destroy, the ability to weed out the unproductive, the ability to have a flexible market economy in which you clearly have successful companies and companies that fail. So you need failure. And the U.S. economy is very good at failure. Europe is not very good at failure. Bankruptcy in Europe is not built around restructuring capital. It's built around, and it's not built around reorganization. It's built much more around getting rid of the company. The U.S. is much better at redeploying labor and capital. So the U.S. has, and this is truly amazing. It's why we recovered much better than most other countries from the financial crisis. It's why we are going to recover from COVID and already are probably recovering from COVID much better than most European countries, because we have this amazing flexibility. We have this amazing flexibility. Somebody asked about Switzerland, although you really should use the Superchat to ask. Switzerland is, I don't know what the numbers are for productivity in Switzerland. I don't know, again, to what extent these numbers and the way they're calculated would capture productivity in Switzerland, because so much of the Swiss economy is based on the service industry, and much of it the financial service industry, and whether the economies of that would be captured. But Switzerland is probably the healthiest economy in Europe. Probably it's certainly among major economies, and we'll get to kind of relative GDP per capita, so wealth in the economies. But relative to other European countries, Switzerland does significantly better than most European countries. Yeah, Jonathan says that Don Watkins is on right now. I shouldn't even tell you because you'll go over there. Is on Clubhouse right now, competing with me. I'll chew him out later for doing that. I mean, isn't it a wonderful world that we live in, and a very different world than it used to be, where objectivist intellectuals are competing with one another in terms of offering programming for an audience live. That never used to happen. I mean, it used to be, people say, oh, objectivism hasn't progressed much. It was more vibrant and exciting, I don't know, in the 1970s or in the 1970s, when hundreds, maybe thousands of people went to see Ayn Rand give a lecture. People forget, not to minimize that, what was going on there. People forget that basically there was one objectivist lecture a year. Ayn Rand gave it at Fort Hall Forum. And if you wanted to meet other objectivists from all over the country, and if you wanted to hear an objectivist lecture, never mind actually see Ayn Rand and maybe meet her, then you went to Fort Hall Forum. So yeah, there were thousands. And then in the 80s, there were like a once-a-year conference and maybe some weekend events. And then in the 90s, there were more weekend events and every year a conference instead of every 2 years conferences. And now, literally, every day on social media, on YouTube or on Clubhouse, so there is an objectivist who's speaking about something, commenting on something, doing a public talk, a public debate or something every single day, almost every hour of the day. I mean, I do 4 shows a week. So, the quantity, the amount of content being consumed today by you, I mean, whoever you are, objectivist, non-objectivist people interested in Ayn Rand, the amount of content consumed today is just, I mean, even a few years ago, I don't think we could have thought it was possible. And you've got a number of intellectuals now who make a living producing this content, whether it's Alex, whether it's me, whether it's Don, and others, and then of course there's the Ayn Rand Institute. It truly is amazing, the amount of content being produced, the amount of variety of content. Now I think it's still not enough. I think there needs to be 100 people in parallel, and all of us making a living off of this, right? Alicia says, we need more You're On book shows per week. You're a very demanding fan, Alicia. I expect to see a big dollar contribution. No, I shouldn't push it. But yeah, think about the amount of content. It is truly stunning. So I celebrate the fact that Don is counter-programming me right now on Clubhouse. I would have preferred it if he'd started an hour earlier and didn't have as much overlap. But hey, competition is good, right? You know, we can outcompete Don, right? So, but no, it's great. It's great. The thing about Clubhouse is that it's not recorded, so you're either there live or it's gone, which I don't particularly like. I like the fact that everything I say is recorded. It can be reused, and people can listen to it later and all of that. So I like the format. But we'll start doing a little bit on Clubhouse. I think Clubhouse is a good opportunity to engage with people who maybe don't listen to the Iran Book Show, and maybe we can get them to move over to the Iran Book Show. All right, back to quickly to kind of Europe. So Europe is overall less productive than the United States, and it's overall significantly poorer than the United States. Now, Switzerland is, you could argue, the best of European countries by some dimensions, although in terms of GDP per capita adjusted for cost of living, the wealthiest country in Europe is what? Anybody know? Anybody know? Well, actually, this number is not adjusted for cost of living. So the wealthiest place GDP per capita wise in Europe is Luxembourg. I mean, literally, it's Luxembourg basically has a population of, first of all, most of its GDP comes from banking for people all over Europe so that they can kind of reduce their tax load. I don't know what people in Luxembourg do other than, in a sense, act as a tax haven for the rest of Europe. There's some industry, a lot of corporations are based in Luxembourg, again, for tax reasons. A lot of hedge funds are based in Luxembourg. I don't know if Monaco is on my list. Maybe it's not. It's Luxembourg. Now, let me just see. Let me take this other list. Wait, this list is better. I like this list better because this adjusts for PPP. Luxembourg is number one in the world, actually, if you adjust for PPP, if you adjust for the cost of living. Singapore, by the way, is number two in terms of GDP per capita adjusted for the cost of living. Qatar is number three. Number four, I think you'd find surprising because it's higher than Switzerland, and yet in Europe. Anybody know what a country would be higher than Switzerland, but still in Europe? Not a little country. The first real country on the list for GDP per capita adjusted for PPP. Eddie got it right. Absolutely. Ireland. And you know why Ireland? Because Ireland has enormous amount, again, this is why PPP is this weird number, a huge amount of corporate income goes into Ireland. And that corporate income is there because a lot of corporations, just like in Luxembourg, a lot of corporations are have their European bases in Ireland because of tax advantages. So they might not be selling, they might not be buying, they might not be producing in Ireland, but they have their corporate headquarters in Ireland, and all that wealth that they really are creating throughout Europe gets captured in the GDP in Ireland. So, but Ireland is probably, put aside Switzerland, Ireland is probably the most successful country in Europe in terms of low tax rates, in terms of social freedoms, in terms of good economic policies, low regulations. Ireland's really a pretty cool place. People are Irish. It's pretty cool. After Ireland is Switzerland, and Switzerland's just got relatively low regulation, relatively low taxation. Although Switzerland's weird because every canton has different regulations. So even though it's a small country, it has multiple different regulatory regimes in different cantons, different tax regimes. But that also means that you can choose which canton to live. So there's variety within Switzerland that you can benefit from. And then Norway. Norway, of course, benefits from the fact that oil. So Norway's almost all about oil. So, and then the United States. So the United States appears behind Switzerland, Norway, Ireland, and Luxembourg in terms of Europe. Every other country in Europe, on a GDP per capita, again, with all the flaws associated with that, is poorer in a sense than the United States. And of course, the United States, that's an average. If you go by states, right, it's really hard to find accurate data here, but if you go by states, very few. Let me see if we have it here. Yeah, so not adjusted for cost of living. New York is the richest state in the country on a per capita basis, and it and Massachusetts have higher GDP per capita than Switzerland. Then it's Connecticut. This is mostly old money, which is interesting. And then California. If you adjust for cost of living, California and New York drop way down, right? But countries like Denmark, if you compare Denmark to a state, then Denmark would be, I don't know, about the same as Missouri, better than New Mexico, worse than Tennessee and Michigan, better than Arizona, Kentucky, Florida, and a per capita GDP. And again, these are probably dated numbers. Florida might be higher now. Hard to tell. So Germany, Sweden, Denmark, Belgium are smack in the middle of the income distribution, of the wealth distribution in the United States. France, way below. Italy, poorer than Mississippi. So is Spain, Greece, Portugal, Mexico, China, South Korea. China, China's poorer than Puerto Rico on a per capita GDP basis. Of course, they have a lot of people. So just gives you perspective. Generally, I mean, I was watching a show yesterday about Denmark, and everybody's raving, oh, Denmark, happiest people in the world. Or maybe, I doubt that. But Denmark's relatively free. I love Copenhagen. One of my favorite cities in the world is Copenhagen. It's a great city. But the fact is that Danish people are have significantly less wealth than Americans. That's just the reality. And more than that, if you look at Danish people in the United States, so people who emigrated to the United States from Denmark, they're dramatically wealthier than Danes who stayed in Denmark. So it's still true that the United States is the more productive country. It's true that the United States is a wealthier country. It's true that at least in terms of averages, the United States, for a middle-class family, is from a standard of living perspective, a better place to live than Europe. Now, if you're lower class, if you're poor or lower middle class, then Europe might be better for you in the sense that Europe has less inequality in wages, in income, and in wealth. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think it's a bad thing. But it has less of that. So at the bottom, you're raised up through social programs, through unions that negotiate higher wages, and then through massive redistribution of wealth. At the top end, you're crushed. So there is very little top end, right? So the distribution is much flatter in Europe. If your entrepreneur is that good, probably not. The United States has a much more entrepreneurial culture. So let's move a little bit to culture. What's the big differences between? So I think the U.S. is more productive, much more flexible. And this is important, much more flexible. Labor flexibility, capital flexibility, banking flexibility, the kind of creative destruction flexibility of redeploying assets very quickly and efficiently. Not as good as we used to be, not as good as we were even 30, 40 years ago. Certainly not as good as we were 100 years ago. But better than Europe, better than Japan, better than China. Standard of living is generally higher for most people. Again, probably not at the low end, but everybody other than the low end. What about culture? What are the big differences culturally? And I'm curious if we have any people on Superchat from Europe and who know America, who could comment on the differences in culture between the U.S. and Europe. Now, in some ways, Europe is better than it used to be, I think, right? So Ayn Rand talks about Europe as staid, conservative, not entrepreneurial, a culture that is very fearful and again, stagnant. And the United States is a culture that, in terms of people's attitude, so more like their sense of life, positive, whereas Europeans are pessimists, Americans are optimists, entrepreneurial, don't tread on me, leave me alone, action-oriented, practical. Europe is interested in hierarchy, in class, in America's much more, you could have a billionaire walking around in shorts and sandals. You can't really tell. So, I think all that is true. However, Europe in some extent has improved, I'd say, over the last 40 years. And the United States has gotten worse over the last 40 years. Particularly, I'm thinking of a country like the UK, England, which I think was very dark, pessimistic, stagnant, going nowhere, no energy, negativity, no entrepreneurial juices at all in the 1960s and 70s. And then I think Thatcher really changed the UK, and I think there was a real revolution in the UK, and the UK became a lot more positive, energized, and entrepreneurial. Much more open than it used to be. Much more friendly than it used to be. I remember England in the 60s and 70s. And a big difference. Even the French. I remember when the French, literally, you went to Paris or France, and they wouldn't speak English to you. Even the ones who knew English wouldn't speak English to you. They really looked down on you. They thought Americans were barbarians. They wanted to have nothing to do with anybody who didn't speak French. And typically fluent French. If you even tried to speak a little bad French, they would poo-poo you and not treat you well. They were obnoxious and unfriendly. I think the French have really changed. They're much more friendly. They're much more open. Again, there's a much better spirit there. I think that happened post-fall of the Berlin Wall, giving up kind of on the socialist ideal. They switched it to a different kind of ideal, which we'll get to. But giving up on that ideal, realizing they'd fallen behind dramatically, economically. Remember, even France voted for a socialist president in 1980, Francois Mitterrand. And then quickly, he tried socialism for like a few years, and then quickly reversed course and adopted much more kind of semi-market reforms, moved much more to the center right, or much more to the center than he ran on. And France boomed after that. There was a real lull when socialism came and boomed after that, and then it's declined since because it's returning kind of to, not to socialism, but to just a stagnant centrism, a stagnant middle-of-the-roadism, neither here nor there. Right? So, and at the same time, the United States, I think, has become, all the virtues I gave it before, all of those has become less than it used to be. So it used to be much more dynamic. It used to be, much more flexible. Americans used to be much more positive. By the way, Richard, thank you for that very, very generous contribution. Thank you for the support. I really appreciate it. And over the last, one second, I'm looking at these super chats. I missed the super chat. Okay, over the last, I don't know, 100 years, we've slowly become less optimistic, less independent, less entrepreneurial. Business creation declined in the 2000s, certainly under Obama and Trump, declined. The first year of a rise in actually new business creation was, funnily enough and weirdly enough, was last year. Because I think as businesses shut down because of COVID, new businesses, the same people who shut down their old businesses, created new ones. So, and people were home, so they created businesses. But it's interesting that I looked at some statistics about business creation, and business creation really spiked last year, and even the first 2 months of this year are some of the best year ever for business creation. So it is interesting. But Americans have become less of all the things that made them positive. Anything Europeans are better at as a culture than the U.S.? Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think generally a great appreciation for history, more knowledge of history, great appreciation of history, more knowledge and great appreciation of art and its role in culture and its importance of culture, and an embrace of art as an important part of life. I think Americans lose because, partially because they're so busy, but they don't focus really on the arts culture side. They settle for what's popular, because it's easy to consume, it's quick, it's simple. Right? Proper says sex. Yeah, attitude towards sex, I think, is probably healthier in Europe than it is in the United States. Not that it's healthy in Europe, because Europe tends to skew more promiscuous. The United States tends to skew more repressed. And to the extent that Americans are promiscuous, they're repressed about even that. So, but Europeans are definitely, I think, have a healthy attitude to nudity, to sex, and to the arts and to culture and things like that. Right? I think Americans can't bother. You can see it to some extent, and I've said this many times. I've complained about this many times. You go to most American suburbia. Even though Americans have a lot of money, you go to suburbia, and every house looks the same. There's some differences, but they're all gray, and they're all blocky, and they're all uninteresting looking, and they're all the same. There's no effort to create an aesthetic when it comes to architecture. Daniel says, I need to speak sexier. I don't know how to speak sexier. Is it an issue of the voice? Is it an issue of the topic? I don't know. You'll have to show me, you'll have to illustrate this, Daniel, in some way so that I can learn from you. So, like homes, they're all the same. Actually, I find Puerto Rico, I think because of the Latin influence, There's a lot, when you go into the wealthier neighborhoods in San Juan, you see a lot more interesting homes. You see modern homes. You see architecture. You might not like some of it, but at least people trying to create something aesthetic. When you go to Beverly Hills, when you go to a lot of wealthy neighborhoods, like in Orange County, California, where I used to live, or McMansions in Dallas or in Denver, they all look the same. And many of them, like in California, the thing to build right now is Tuscan. So everything in California, the houses look like Tuscan homes. Little windows, even though they have magnificent views. Little windows, courtyards. No, I mean, we have air conditioning. Tuscan architecture was appropriate for no air conditioning. We have air conditioning. We have insulated windows. Why not enjoy the view? Blow up the windows. It's just, why would you have a courtyard in a place that has a view? The open space should be facing the view. So, traveling in Europe, you see people who have money at least. Now, you see an attempt to create some kind of aesthetic around the homes that they live in, which you don't see in the U.S. And if you walk into an American house, again, particularly wealthy house, there are two variations. One is they're trying to be cultured, so they have a bunch of antiques and gaudy mishmash of style, they're trying to be European, but old European. Or just nothing, no art, or just whatever's popular, but there's very little taste. There's very little focus on aesthetic. And again, I've been in homes in South America and in Europe, and you just there's just a better sense of taste, a better sense of aesthetics, and there's focus on that. Americans, their attitude, there's a kind of a mind-body dichotomy with Americans. They're busy making money, they're busy working, they're busy being productive, which is great. And they ignore, funnily enough, they ignore the spiritual, they ignore, the art, the culture, the beauty. They ignore beauty. That's a good way to put it. Except, when it comes to maybe human beauty, that they ignore creating a beautiful surrounding. And one of my pet things to argue and encourage you guys to do is to focus more on beauty. To focus more on beauty. To concentrate effort more on beauty. To try to create a beautiful life for yourself. By the way, Bradley Thompson, who's a professor at Clemson University, who's been on the show many times and actually is due to come on soon. I need to schedule him in. Just put out something, The Good, the Bad, and Ugly, where he's gonna talk about beauty on a regular basis, about what he finds beautiful. You might disagree with him about what he finds beautiful. I certainly am going to, but that we need more focus on that. We need more, and particularly in objectivism, we need more discussion about that. I don't particularly love cathedrals. No, I mean, it is a sense in which I hate cathedrals. Because the whole point of a cathedral is to make you small. To make you small. So I'm not a fan of cathedrals. And in architecture, I'm generally a fan of modern architecture, particularly Frank Lloyd Wright, but post a lot of other architects, post Frank Lloyd Wright, many of whom I don't know. I like, in terms of like office buildings and cityscapes, I like the architecture of Hong Kong. I like the architecture of Shanghai. I like the architecture. I like London, because London is such a wide variety of architectural styles, from very old to 19th century to early 20th century to very kind of exciting modern architectural attempts. Well, Daniel says a cathedral is like God looking down at you. It's not so much God looking down at you. It's it's not even somebody looking down at you. It's more how puny you are, how nothing you are, how the church is all, and you are nothing. Which is the opposite of what you feel when you see a skyscraper. Skyscraper gives you a sense of human beings built it for human beings, not as a monument to God, not through sacrifice, which is what cathedrals were built. They were built with human sacrifice, both in treasure and in lives. But in America, when we build something tall, we build it for people, either to live in or to work in and be productive in. It's very different, even though you get the same sense of height. And the essential is the purpose for which it is built, combined with the height, is what gives you kind of the sense of it all. So there's elements of culture that are far better in Europe than they are in the United States. Although that is, again, you're seeing more equality, primarily because Europe, like everybody else, is deteriorating, because Europe is adopting more and more, if you will, kind of modern art and the art that is worthless and meaningless and stupid. Like, I went to see an opera in Vienna, and I thought, oh, this is going to be exciting. I'm going to the Vienna Opera, one of the great opera houses in the world. And what a tradition and what a history. And think of all the conductors who conducted here and the singers who have sung here. This is amazing, right? And then the staging with this modern crap that was just awful and destroyed the whole experience for me. So Europeans have embraced modern art throughout the culture in a way that Americans haven't. And that's to their detriment. And their sense of life, well, I think that, again, they're better Europeans, and Eastern Europe is a little different than Western Europe, but their sense of life is still much darker than Americans, still much bleaker than American sense of life. But, again, America's changing. You know, one of the goals of the Obama administration was to make America more like Europe. And I really think that they did. And I think Trump did as well. Kind of a different angle on Europe, kind of the more populist European elements. And then Biden is going to move us more towards Europe. And I want to talk in a minute about, you know, one aspect of that, which is healthcare, because I think that's really interesting. I read an op-ed about healthcare that was interesting, in a sense, comparing the U.S. to the European healthcare systems, which I think is important. So should the United States become more like Europe? No. Should Europe become more like the United States? Yes. Should both just become better? Yes. Can Americans learn something from Europeans? Absolutely. A sense of aesthetic, the importance of culture, the importance of, if you will, secular, spiritual values. But then you probably think I'm talking about Buddha or something, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about primarily aesthetic values. Can Europeans learn from America? Absolutely. The positive is the action-oriented, the entrepreneurship, the positive view of the future, the gung-ho attitude towards changing the world. Europeans are way too settled in their ways. There's way too, and even if you look at the wealthy in Europe, most of it's old wealth. In the U.S., it's still true that most of the wealth is new wealth. That tells you a lot about a culture. But we are seeing the world become more uniform, bland, differences disappearing across cultures as the world embraces similar economic and philosophical ideas. Europeans are still more collectivist than Americans, but America's catching up. Europeans are still more socialist than Americans, but Americans are catching up. On the right, Europeans are more nationalist than Americans, but Americans are catching up. Europeans are more tribalist than Americans. And in the past, a lot more tribalist. But Americans are catching up, right? So everything is kind of going on this, I'd say, gray, collectivist, tribalist, and blurring the differences, the fundamental differences. And that's sad. That's sad. There's certain ideological elements. I mean, certainly in economics, Europe is much worse. Economic ideas, economic thinking. Egalitarianism is much more prevalent in certain parts of European culture. But what is unique about American culture, what America is exporting to Europe these days, is the whole woke phenomena. The whole trigger warnings, the whole snowflake phenomena. That, even though Europe has hate speech laws, the attitude of people towards, you can't say that word, you can't say this word, and you can't say this, and you can't say that, and we'll cancel you here, and we'll cancel you. That's much worse in America than it is in Europe. And indeed, that's one, usually the United States imports its ideas from Europe. All the dominant ideas in America, with the exception of pragmatism, have been imported from Europe. Progressivism, generally all the ideas on the left, nationalism, a certain form of racism from the right. All of those ideas imported to the United States. And of course, the good ideas too. The Founding Fathers imported the Enlightenment to the United States. And postmodernism was imported. But now postmodernism in the United States has morphed into these uniquely American forms, which have generated these microaggressions and trigger warnings and woke culture and cancel culture. And that was sending back to Europe. So Europe used to be a lot better in those things than the United States. And then I discovered that, particularly in the UK, all this stuff was being completely imported into UK universities. And they were becoming exactly like American universities. I want to just mention one area in which the left certainly, but almost everybody, complains that Europe is much better than the United States. And that is healthcare. Kayo Sayo says that the Oscars now are awarding the same films as European festivals like Cannes and Venice, The Shape of Water, Parasite, Rome, Joker. Yes, I think that's right. I think the Oscars are becoming more modern in that sense. Modern in the negative sense. More modern art, modern culture, more European. But it's also true that we're making in America less good movies with an American sense of life. I mean, there are exceptions. There are exceptions. Whiplash won an Oscar. There have been years where non-European style movies have won Oscars. But also good movies, not movies that are, a lot of the movies that win Oscars are popular movies, maybe have a better sense of life, but are pretty shitty movies. All right, let's talk about health quickly in the context of the vaccine. So Europe is way behind in distribution of vaccines, in spite of the fact that you'd think they'd be way ahead. After all, they have centralized healthcare systems. They have central planners ready to go. They have infrastructure for distributing healthcare because everything's centralized. They have so they have an infrastructure you'd expect to work. They bought a lot of vaccines in advance. So you would think Europe would vaccinate quickly. It's vaccinated very, very slowly, and they've got massive problems in terms of the vaccination. But more than that, even in the United States, vaccination is not going great. And one of the things that are problematic in the U.S. that everybody is going to point to and going to make a big deal out of is the fact that in vaccinating in the United States, we're seeing big inequalities. That is, poor people and minorities are having a hard time getting vaccines relative to, let's say, wealthy people. So, there is lots of discrepancies and weird behavior when it comes to the vaccines. And I would argue that's not surprising, given the fact that vaccines are being distributed by the government. Vaccines are free. I think that the poor would actually do much better in a system where vaccines were sold, vaccines were distributed on a for-profit basis, vaccine were distributed by private entities, including nonprofits, by the way, who would be vaccinating poor people, and employers who would be vaccinating the employees, instead of the private sector distributing vaccines based on priorities given who will pay for the vaccine. Instead of that, we're seeing the government do it. And because the government do it, we're seeing massive distortions, massive perversions. And you might say, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. The whole point of the government doing it is to achieve this egalitarian outcome, to achieve equality of outcome in some sense. I mean, ultimately, the National Health Service in England, the NHS, the God in the UK, I mean, you can criticize anything in the UK except the NHS. Ultimately, wasn't the NHS founded a single-payer system run by the government, employed by the government, delivered by the government, in order to make healthcare free of charge at point of delivery, to make it equal between all the different classes in England, so that you got a high-quality, uniform healthcare system? That was the idea. That was the point. And isn't it the case, people would say, that the UK has an egalitarian healthcare system, right? Where the rich and the poor are treated exactly alike. And poverty is not a disability, and wealth is not a disadvantage. By the way, this comes from an op-ed written by one of the best commentators on healthcare issues in the U.S. today, by a guy by the name of John C. Goodman, who has, I think, his own institute. It's called the Goodman Institute that does healthcare stuff. This is in a Forbes article called Who is Getting the Vaccine, Who Isn't, and Why. And so he makes this point. The NHS was created for equality. And yet, in study after study after study, they find that the creation of the NHS has not equalized healthcare access or healthcare outcomes at all. That even under the NHS, the wealthy get better service, better quality healthcare, and better outcomes. Here's a quote from a report called the Black Report that was done, I think, 20 or 30 years. The NHS was founded in 1948, so this was done in 1980. This was done in 1980. It will come as a disappointment to many that over long periods since the inception of the NHS, there is generally little sign of health inequalities in Britain actually diminishing. And in some cases, they may be increasing. It will be seen that the group has reached the view that the cause of health inequalities are so deep-rooted that only a major and wide-ranging program of public expenditures is capable of altering the pattern. So the only way to solve the deep-rooted inequalities in healthcare delivery, even under an NHS system, is to double down on the NHS. 2 decades later, in 2000s, another report, the Atchison Report, found that not only did inequalities not diminish since the publication of the Black Report, the earlier report in 1980, they appear to actually have gotten worse. In Canada, studies find that the wealthy and powerful have significantly greater access to medical specialists than less well-connected poor people. High-profile patients enjoy more frequent services, shorter waiting times, and greater choices of specialists, in spite of the fact that they have socialized medicine. Moreover, among non-elderly white population, low-income Canadians are 22% more likely to be in poor health than their U.S. counterparts. So poor Canadians are more likely to be in poor health than poor Americans. That's stunning. It's a stunning result. You won't hear that in the media reported, right? Now, why is this? Because it doesn't cost anything. Healthcare in Canada, for the patient, doesn't cost anything. It costs the taxpayer, who is the patient, but they pay that way. But supposedly at the point of service, it doesn't cost them anything. So why is it that the rich are getting better service than the poor? Well, one reason is that the better hospitals in richer neighborhoods, the better equipment is in richer neighborhoods, the best doctors live in the better neighborhoods. Why is that? Well, because who do you think has more political sway? Because decisions on where to build hospitals, where to put the equipment, what to pay doctors who go to particular hospitals, who determines that? Well, politicians do. Who do you think has more political sway? Rich people or poor people? Well, the wealthy do. So they allocate resources to their neighborhood. It's the same reason why public education in wealthy neighborhoods is far better than public education in poor neighborhoods, even when educational funding in the United States is not based on property taxes. The rich are just better at manipulating the political system to allocate more resources to them. Instead of paying more for the service, they devote more time to politics, which they can afford to do. What else? Well, Canadians and Brits have better social relationships with doctors. So they know their doctors. They go to the same country club with their doctors. They associate with their doctors. So they're much more likely to be able to call up a doctor and say, hey, please, I really need to see you. Can you bump me in the line? And most doctors will say, sure, because they're your friends. Much more likely than a carpenter, bricklayer, waitress at a restaurant. Yeah, the article is in Forbes. It's called Who is Getting the Vaccine, Who Isn't, and Why. And generally, I would encourage people to look up John C. Goodman for healthcare stuff. He's mostly very good. Right? So, now, in Britain, Canada, this isn't true. Britain has a private sector which offers some services. So a lot of wealthy patients have a financial relationship with their doctor. So even if they're in a public hospital, the doctor's getting paid on the side. And then finally, the fact is that higher income, better educated people are just better at navigating bureaucracy than poor people. They have more time, they have more resources, and they're more educated about it. They know how to do it. So what happens in socialized medicine is you ration. Instead of resources being allocated based on price, resources are allocated based on political incentives. And they're rationed based on political pull. Somebody said here, referring to an Ayn Rand term, the aristocracy of pull. What we get is aristocracy of pull. Instead of market signals, price signals for value, you get political pull. You get connections. In Israel, they call it protektia, which is translated into protection. You get cronyism. Socialized medicine does not improve the health care even of the poor. What it really does is create a pull-peddling society. it moves us again more towards tribalism. And of course, the United States system of healthcare is not a good system because, and the vaccines is a good example of that, because the vaccines have used socialized healthcare principles. And this was, by the way, established by Trump. The Trump administration decided that the government will be the sole distributor of the vaccines. The Trump administration decided that the government would buy all the vaccines and distribute them all, not use the market system. So we have a system in the United States that's a hybrid between the two. A lot of socialization, some private. The private works great. Socialized works terrible. And even the private, because it doesn't have full pricing mechanisms and signals, doesn't work as well as it could work. Again, America moving towards Europe, not the other way around. America become more socialized, not the other way around. But I would rather be in the American health system than any other health system in the world. Europeans could learn a lot from the better parts of the American health system. And America should learn from itself on how to make its health system a lot better. John mentions that John Goodman used to be actually interested in objectivism. I don't know if he was an objectivist ever, but he was in the 60s and early 70s was used to be one of the distributors of NBI tapes in the 60s, and then I guess Second Renaissance. So very interested in objectivism, influenced by Ayn Rand, but turned to religion, and it is far from objectivist today, but mostly very good on healthcare issues. He gets it. And very, very informative articles. So to the extent that you're interested, that's where you should go. All right. I thought that was a quick, Jesus, it lasted an hour. A quick kind of bit of a differentiation. You could go into depth on any one of these topics, and we do, and we have, and we will in future shows. But I thought it would be good to do one kind of big thing to give you a sense of these. All right, let's quickly jump to Super Chat. We've got a couple of high dollar questions. I'll start with those. Let me see. Why do you think Europe is less regulated while having a larger welfare state, while America is more regulated with less welfare? Has Europe recognized that it requires a less regulated economy to produce the wealth required for large welfare states? Well, I wouldn't say that Europe is less regulated as a whole. I think there's certain places in Europe, like, for example, in Scandinavia, in certain forms of regulations are lower in Europe than lower in those countries than the United States. On the other hand, a place like France, you have much higher regulations than in the United States. A place like Italy has much higher regulations than in the United States. Scandinavia, for example, does not have a minimum wage. They do have strong unions who negotiate high wages, but they don't have a minimum wage. They don't try to impose it like that. Financial regulations are a lot looser, and used to be, for example, a lot looser before the financial crisis. In the UK, they, of course, learned all the wrong lessons from the financial crisis and tried to emulate regulations in the US, which are actually what caused the financial crisis. Why do they have less regulations? It's kind of interesting. The attitude they have towards business and the attitude Americans have towards business. I think this is true. In Europe, they assume businessmen are going to make a lot of money, but they assume they're also going to play by certain rules. By the rules, if you will, of stakeholders, benefiting society, being good stewards of whatever. And they have a certain respect for them as kind of modern aristocrats. They don't admire them. They don't have the kind of attitude I think Americans do to some extent towards businessmen, where the celebrities in some aspects. I don't think in Europe they are. But there's a certain way in which they're trusted. Yeah, they're trusted. They're one of the gang. They're one of the tribe. they're going to do what's good for the tribe. In America, we have a different type of love-hate relationship with businessmen. We love them, we adore them, we want to be one of them, we make them into celebrities, but we don't trust them. We don't trust them. We know that they're in it for the money, and that taints what they do. Because they're in it for the money, they're selfish, and therefore they might be, they're probably less honest, and therefore need to be watched, need to be much more carefully watched. I think because business in Europe was much closer to the state originally. Business in Europe, the original wealth in Europe, and UK is probably different, but let's say in Scandinavia, came out of aristocratic families. They weren't these kind of people who just bootstrapped themselves out of poverty and made a fortune. We don't trust those as much. So it's kind of this different attitude and different expectation and different perspective. So in America, we regulate businesses because we think they're selfish and therefore they'll do anything to make a buck, which in a sense is fine with us, but we want to put a regulator on their shoulder just in case. Right? Now, not to say Europe's not heavily regulated in different ways. France, Italy, Spain have their regulation are particularly focused on protecting labor. So you basically can't fire anybody in Italy. I don't know what it's like in Spain. You can't go bankrupt in Italy. You can't reassign capital in Italy. So I think that's why. The redistribution of wealth is, Europeans are far more Marxist and far more egalitarian in a sense that they've really devoted a lot of resources to helping the poor. But funnily enough, they're far more efficient at it. They're better at it. The United States spends a huge amount of money and effort to try to help the poor, and they can't make a dent. Europeans are much better at it. Americans also have hurt themselves because of progressive education. We've also, there was another point I wanted to make. Yeah, a lot of we're fragmenting all our kind of social programs in a way to pretend that they're not socialism. So we try to do more self-deception. So we try to pretend that Social Security is not redistributive and Medicare is not really redistributive. You pay into the system. The Europeans don't bother with that. They know they're redistributing. They're happy to do it. No problem. We just do it. In a sense, they're more honest. But they're more committed to that redistribution. But we have like hundreds of programs for welfare. They might have a dozen for our hundreds. And therefore, much more focused, much more efficient, get the work done much better. In the sense that welfare can be efficient and gets work done, right? There's a lot less overhead. Picked up economics in one lesson yesterday. On my last couple of pages today, wow, that's a quick read, man. You're a fast reader. Is it normal for a beginner to be a little confused by some practical applications in the book until further study? Or was it intended to be understood the first time through? Now, yeah. I mean, first it was written in 1947. So some of the examples and some of the way it's presented makes it more difficult than it needs to be. But part of the point of the book is that economics is a deep science in a sense that what economics actually studies is not first-level effects, but the underlying effects, the second and third-level effects. And as he's describing those, they're not easy or self-evident. I mean, the book relative to other economic books is easy read, but it's still not easy. It still requires real thinking. It requires breaking down his examples and trying to think them through. So, I mean, really the whole book is an illustration of the broken window fallacy. And once you get the broken window fallacy, your energy should be focused on how does this apply in this case, and in this case, and in this case, and that's chapter by chapter. How is it applying? So I would definitely read it again a little slower because you read it really fast, and try to think through the examples. That would be my suggestion, Corey. You know, I once did a chapter by chapter quick highlights of the chapter analysis, bringing it into modern times. Those videos exist somewhere. Those videos exist. I wonder where. Let's see, economics. Let's just search Google in one lesson. Yaron Brook. Let's see if it comes up. Yeah, it looks like it's available on Amazon. Yeah, it's you know, short videos, but I guess they're selling it on CD or something. It's produced by PJ Media, and it's me and two other guys going chapter by chapter on those videos. You can look it up. So just Google Economics in One Lesson, Yaron Brook. Let's see where else you can find it. Yeah, it looks like PJ Media, Pajama Media, tried to sell it, and so it's behind some kind of paywall somewhere, and you'd have to find it. So just put my name and Economics in One Lesson, and this is fascinating. It's on Amazon, and a bunch of people gave it 1 star. How come? That's not nice. Yeah, they're fun videos. They're fun videos. And I think it's all three of us. It's me, Terry Jones, and Alan Barton. 3 minutes on each chapter. 3 minutes on each chapter. Yeah, I'm getting no royalties. It's not Amazon ripping me off. It's PJ Media is somehow ripping me off. Anyway, I'm going to look for it. If I find a free copy somewhere, I'll post it on Twitter or something. All right, let's go back and look at the other Super Chat questions. There are quite a few of them. One thing I like more about Europeans and Israelis is they're not afraid to be expressive. Americans repressed, and immature. Yes, there's definitely something about, I don't know about Europeans. Europeans are pretty repressed, particularly Northern Europeans. I mean, Northern Europeans, it's hard to get them to express an emotion. It's very difficult to speak to crowds in Scandinavia. You can't read them, and they're not very expressive. It's easy to speak to crowds in Eastern Europe. They're very expressive, or in Southern Europe, although it's hard to get a crowd in Southern Europe. UK are better. The Brits are better. But Israelis are fun because they're very expressive. They tell you exactly what they think. You don't play games. Israelis don't play games. You know, Americans, it's interesting when they disagree with you. What do they say when an American doesn't like something you've said or something you've showed him or something like that? Americans will say, that's interesting. That's interesting. That means they didn't like it. Like an Israeli would say, I don't like it. Or maybe he'd just say, nah, that's crap. Right? So you know exactly where you stand with an Israeli. Israel has this combination of attitudes between Europeans and Americans that has spurned a real entrepreneurial and I think relatively sophisticated culture. Terrible politics, but pretty good culture. Yeah, I like people who are expressive. And part of why... Yeah, and I think Americans are incredibly friendly, but they're too polite. They're to making an effort. They're not as genuine as they could be, culturally. Are there wealthy people you would regard as living an unsuccessful life? Oh, yeah. Many of them, right? Because many of them feel guilty for their wealth. Many of them are second or third generation wealth and they've squandered their life. They haven't been productive. They haven't done anything interesting with their life. Many of them, some have made their money by doing immoral things. So no, the fact that somebody is wealthy doesn't mean that they've lived a successful life. I think even some of the people I admire in Silicon Valley, you can admire them as businessmen, but you would say, in terms of the life they're living, so-so. Right? They could have done so much more with what they have that it's disappointing often when you meet them. What do you make of saying, quote, you can't plan everything, you have to react? I mean, there's a truth there, right? What do they say? That in battle, the best laid plans are gone and you just... No, I don't think that's true in battle, and I don't think that's true in life. I think that it's true that your plan has to be flexible. Whatever plan you have, it has to take into account the unexpected. It has to take into account that things might not turn out. The context might be different than what you planned it to be. So a plan has to be adaptable, flexible. And you might have to react, but even then, it's not that you have to be emotional. You have to react based on the best knowledge that you have, based on the planning that you have done, and based on the circumstances that turned out to be different than your plan anticipated. So the more your plan takes into account the fact that the context can shift on you, that things can change, that you might fail, that things might not work according to plan, the better plan it is. I think I talked about it earlier, but one of the big differences, it just reminded me, one of the big differences between European culture and American culture is this flexibility. American culture is much more flexible. Americans, entrepreneurs, Americans generally are much more flexible, much more open to changes, much more open to making changes on the move, if you will, than Europeans who are much more rigid. But it's also the case that Americans are much more open to failure, much more willing to fail, much more willing to learn from failure. And it's not a cultural stigma to fail in the United States. A failure is tolerated, whereas in Europe it is not. Okay, some European states have freer aspects, civil liberties, economy, than the U.S. But it isn't comparable. I wish Canada was more like the U.S., not the reverse. Reading Oprah as my first objectivist philosophy book. Thank you, Yuan. I'm so excited you're reading Oprah. That's great. Don't forget to read Ayn Rand after that. But yes, Oprah you should read slowly and really think about almost every paragraph because, I mean, it's so accurate. It's so condensed. And it's so beautifully written. So brilliant. That you should definitely relish it. Really think about it, and it's worth reading more than once, ultimately. They changed the name Mr. Potato Head to Potato Head, so the toy would no longer be gendered. How are we not living in 1984? Could Ayn Rand have imagined such successful businessmen could be this cowardly and unprincipled? No, I really don't think Ayn Rand would have anticipated this particular form of irrationality. I really don't think I don't think so. Again, I have to read again what she wrote about feminism. Maybe she saw it coming. But this really is an outgrowth of militant feminism, of the kind of feminism that came out of the 1960s and 70s that wanted to completely eliminate the differences between men and women. And now they want to multiply the differences. And now they want to have 92 different genders who somehow are all different somehow. But no, the absurdity of these things, just the stupidity of it. I hate to break it to them, but there's such a thing as men and women. And they are the same in very important ways, and they are different in important ways. Important ways that generally don't affect, for example, their ability to think or their ability to be productive, but important ways in a sense of their ability to, how they perform in sex, ability to get pregnant, ability to breastfeed. Daniel, I can't wait to be canceled. I mean, God, that will be so good for publicity. Don't you think? So, I don't know that Ayn Rand could have imagined. I think she could have imagined businessmen selling out. I don't think she could have imagined this being the issue of the day. The issue that is shaping society or breaking society up or that we're fighting over. That, I mean, I still don't believe it, really. I mean, it's at the perceptual level, the denying perception. That's how absurd and ridiculous it is. Now, not to say that there isn't complexity about gender and what gender means and what gender is, and the whole, the whole trans issue. I mean, it's bizarre that a marginal issue like the trans issue, which is a marginal issue, gets so much press. But the fact that that's what we obsess about. I mean, it's not to deny the complexity of that. There is real complexity there. There is real knowledge that needs to be gained about what exactly is going on there and what it all means and what's going on in the minds of these people and why and what is it, right? But that does not justify the absolute, unmitigated obsession that exists today. Can you do a show on Cave in the Light? Yeah, that's a good idea. I will do that. I'm actually going to read it again before I do that. So I'm going to listen to it. I downloaded it actually today, as it happens, on audiobook, and I'm going to listen to it. This will be my second time through. But that'll give me a good background to do it. Of course, if you really want me to do it, then, a show sponsorship, I should remind everybody that you can sponsor a show and get me to do any topic you want for $1,000. We've had a lot of sponsor shows. I still owe Troy a show on Atlas Shrugged. That'll be on Friday. And I still owe, I forget whom exactly, but I still owe a review of a movie. I forget the name of the movie, but I have it written down. So not a problem. So I will get to those. Maybe this weekend I'll try to do the movie review if I have time to watch the movie in the next few days. But The Cave in the Light is a very good book about history, how history was shaped by Aristotle and Plato and the conflict between them. Was it called Weird Science? I don't think it was called Weird Science. It was something genius. You like the hand justice? Somebody likes the hand justice. All right. Oh, and don't forget, before you leave the show, to like the show. Press the like button. We've got 134. We've been up to 150, but we've got a lot less likes. So don't forget before you leave to like the show. Don't forget to subscribe. And, of course, we can't do these shows without your financial support. Real Genius, that was the movie. And don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to financially support the show on Superchat. Of course, today's been a pretty good day on Superchat, so thank you for all of the Superchatters. But also on Subscribestar, on Patreon, and on YourOnBookShow.com, where you can become a monthly contributor, which for my planning is much better because then I have regularity and I know what's coming. Thank you, Daniel, for my ex-YouTube career, given that Daniel is going to arrange for me to be canceled by YouTube, I think. That's what he's working on. Is the internet subverting the stranglehold by universities or amplifying it? I think it's subverting it, and I think it will do more so in the future. I think that's only going to grow. But I do think that has the potential and is to some extent subverting it. Online education generally is going to subvert universities. I think these are our great hopes. The fact that you can listen to Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris and to some extent me, but to courses on history, on finance, on economics, Peter Schiff, on YouTube is definitely undermining the rigidity of what they teach in university, where you only get one dominant perspective. And I think you're going to see more of that, not less. I hope so, anyway. Let's see. We've got a couple more super chat. If you don't care about truth in reality, only about your image and your place in the hierarchy, is that a form of primacy of consciousness or just narcissism? Is narcissism and primacy of consciousness the same thing? No. I don't think it's the same thing. Narcissism is more of a psychological phenomenon. It's not an approach to knowledge. Primacy of consciousness is a metaphysical view that says that, in a sense, your consciousness creates reality. Your consciousness is the standard for truth, not reality. Now, some narcissists have primacy of consciousness. Some primacy of consciousness people are narcissists. But I don't think they're necessarily the same. And certainly, primacy of consciousness is much broader than narcissism. Much broader. So, another perspective on this is being a second-hander. That is using other people as the standard. That might not be, that is primacy of consciousness, but it's other people's consciousness. So, altruism is other people's consciousness, which is not typically narcissistic. But it's still a primacy of consciousness. What they believe is true because they believe it, not because it matches reality. That's also primacy of consciousness. It doesn't have to be your consciousness. So, primacy of consciousness is a metaphysical statement. Narcissism is a particular, maybe it's a particular manifestation of that psychologically. Narcissism is a psychological phenomenon. Primacy of consciousness is a philosophical idea. Are you surprised at how far the objectivist movement has come, or shocked at how small it is? It still is. I guess a little bit of both. It depends on the day. I think it's come a long way. And it's shockingly amazing how prevalent objectivist content is out there in the culture. You guys are too young to remember it, although some of us are older. John here was obviously studying objectivism in the late 1960s, so he might even be older than I am. But when I first discovered Ayn Rand, there was no internet. I didn't know she was alive, didn't know who she was. I thought for 3 years that I was like one of the only people who'd ever read this book, certainly the only person who took it seriously. I didn't know anybody else. I had to scrounge around to find any Ayn Rand books I could, which was not easy, really, really difficult. It took me 3 years, 4 years, before I really found other objectivists, discovered there was a whole objectivist movement in the U.S., that she was alive, that all this was going on. It was just impossible to get information. There were no Leonard Peikoff courses back then. And when the courses came out in the 70s, late 70s and 80s, they were very expensive. I couldn't afford them. I never listened to them. I only listened to them much later. So I learned objectivism by reading Ayn Rand and by talking to other objectivists through the 1980s. There were Second Renaissance books, but that was in the 80s. And even then, I lived in Israel, and it was very difficult to get all of that stuff. Think about where you are right now, right? Everything Leonard Peikoff's done, everything Ayn Rand's done, is available online. It's available, almost all of it is available instantaneously. Much of it is available for free. Even the stuff that's not available for free, like Ayn Rand's books, I can download right now. I can probably go ahead in the next 5 minutes and download 10 Ayn Rand books onto my Kindle or onto my iPhone to listen to. Everything is instantaneous. Everything is at our fingertips. In the old days of NBI, there was a lot of objectivist activity in New York, but only in New York. And there were some clubs around the country that listened to tapes and stuff, but it was sparse and difficult and expensive and hard to get a hold of and all of that stuff. Now, as we said, there's objectivists on some platform, somewhere, speaking about something almost all the time. You can get all the material instantaneously, whenever you want. I mean, if you read Atlas Shrugged today and it changed your life like it did for me when I was 16, you can instantaneously access an entire world. An entire world. Immediately. Now, maybe to some extent that's overwhelming and maybe we lose some people because of that. Maybe the more slower progression was better. I don't know. But wow, what a difference. I'm excited by the number of objectivists out there who are active and willing to take. I'm a little disappointed they're not more. I guess 20 years ago I would have expected more by now, given the advancement in technology. But there's still a lot. And it's still amazing how many. So I'm surprised. Yeah, so I'm positive about how many objectivists there are and what they're doing and how they're doing it. I'm happy about that and disappointed a little bit as well. The movement has grown, but not always in healthy ways. Because a lot of people who I thought were objectivists turned out not to be. A lot of people who I thought were objectivists turned out to be mainly motivated by things like politics. Turned out to be more tribal and collectivist. But I've known that for many, many, many decades. As I think I said in a show earlier this week, some of my best friends who were objectivists in the 80s all became religious in the 1990s, which was weird, strange. So it doesn't surprise me that a bunch of objectivists became Trumpists, Trump fanatics. Yeah, so it's a mixture of being excited about where we are and be excited and how far we've come and also being a little disappointed by it. I don't think I'm really shocked by anything because I've lived in this world for so long and been a part of shaping it in some ways for so long that its evolution is kind of gradual. It's not like I entered in 1 year and then came back 20 years later and was shocked by something. It's all kind of grown organically. Feel free to address this some other time, but I think gender isn't a good concept. And we should use aesthetic in way of using our outward appearance as the art that reflects our sense of life and philosophy. I guess I don't even understand that. I don't really understand it. Because I don't think the differences biologically, the differences physiologically between a man and a woman are only aesthetic. They're clearly biological. They're clearly functional. And I think they impact our souls. They impact the kind of human being we become. I think women and men are different in a fundamental psychological sense that is somewhat shaped by the fact that we are different biologically. So it's not just aesthetic. It's deeper than that. It's physiological and psychological, and as a consequence, psychological. I think there's a psychology involved in being, and I'm going to get in big trouble for this, quote, the weaker sex, in a sense of physical weakness. I think there's a psychological issue there that, I think people would like to ignore and evade, but it's there, right? And there is a lot of, anyway, there's a lot to say about this topic. And I'm not an expert. But there's a lot to say about it. And I think that it's difficult to talk about today because people are so defensive about this topic. But it would be good to have a real conversation about where we actually talk about it. And granted that we're going to make mistakes about it. And it's not just, Adrian says, testosterone is there. Women have testosterone. Men just have more of it. And men, as they get older, have lower testosterone. So does that make them more fit? No, it's very, very, very complicated if you want to take it down to the physiological level. Because it's the interaction of things. It's at what age do they become important and what manifests itself at different ages that shape our psychology and shape our soul, if you will. So it's difficult. So you're saying sex equals anatomy. Gender is normally the social role expected to come with anatomy. I'm not. Is that true? If that's true, then I agree with you. But then I'm not sure why aesthetic would change it, or would be an alternative. But I'm not convinced that that's what gender means. So let's do this. I'll research, because I am not, this is not exactly, other than my knowledge of male and female from living, I'm not a psychologist. I haven't looked at studies. I don't really know much about the field. So I can only comment from personal experience, right? But let me do a little research about gender, and I'll come back with you, Naruto, and we can have that conversation. And by the way, if anybody wants to sponsor a show about sex, gender, and topics like that, you can sponsor a show for $1,000. I will do it. I will do the topic you want on the timing you want it. Somebody, just a quick question. Have you met Ayn Rand? No, I never met Ayn Rand. When she died, I was in the Israeli army. I remember the day she died because they announced it on Israeli radio. They announced it on Israeli radio, and it was a Sunday morning because I was ironing. I remember I was ironing my uniform to get ready to put it on and go hitchhike to base. It was 1982. It was March. Early March, it was about now, 1982, and they announced it on the radio, and it's like this, it just hit me. It was just this stunning event that, this woman who had completely changed my life, who I'd never met. That evening, I got together with friends who were objectivists. We did we celebrated Ayn Rand's life. I can't remember exactly what we did, but we hung out and we had a good time. So many of those friends became religious later. But it was March 6, 1982. I'm pretty sure it was a Sunday just because I was home. I was at my parents' house. So I would go to my parents only on like a Saturday, on a weekend, Friday night and Saturday. And then Sunday morning I'd get up early, iron my uniform, and go to. But it's interesting that they announced it on Israeli radio. She was very popular in Israel in those days. And still is to some extent. Still is. You mentioned recently that you would be coming soon to speak in Brazil. Yeah, it looks like it, if the Brazilian government doesn't put in some kind of restrictions on gatherings. When and where that's going to happen, how can we buy tickets? So if I come to Brazil, I expect that I will speak in Porto Alegre at least 2 events. São Paulo, probably 2 or 3 events. We're still working on it. Rio de Janeiro, right now I have 1 event, and Belo Horizonte, 1 event. Now, if you're interested in attending an event, if you live in one of those cities and you're interested in attending, then email me at juran@juranbookshow.com, and I'll try to let you know how to get tickets. Some of these events are going to be private, but maybe I can try to get you in spite of the fact that they're private. And maybe you know some people in your city that would like to invite me to come and speak in your city, and I would go anywhere. Vitoria, Florentinopolis, any of these places, I would probably go to speak. So right now it looks like it'll be April 9th, April 9th till April 19th. April 9th would be Porto Alegre. April 19th would be Belo Horizonte. But I fear, Sayo just is mentioning that São Paulo is going on a 14-day lockup. I fear that that's what's going to happen. And given that I have to make a decision soon, that we might have to cancel because I can't wait till the last minute, and some events will happen and some events won't, and so on, because that'll just, I mean, it will destroy my schedule and you know, will destroy my financial ability to go. So I want to come. I want to do it in April. I'm hoping it's feasible. I'm hoping to know more tomorrow. I'm expecting to get some information from some of my hosts in Brazil to let me know if it's doable. But I'm really hoping to come, and hopefully we can meet when I'm there. So that is the plan right now. So please email me. Those of you who listen from Brazil, please email me at yaron@yaronbookshow.com, and I will give you information, or I will give your name to people who are organizing the events, and they will give you the information about how to attend. European mobile banking apps are just amazing. Yes, better than the U.S., partially because of U.S. regulations. Have you seen any of them? A multi-currency account, low, no fees, send money anywhere quickly, in and out of crypto cheaply, the ability to reverse charges and put in another currency. How can the U.S. be more like Europe in this area? The United States has to massively deregulate financial services. Financial services in Europe are, and this is a gap that has grown over the last 200 years. The United States has always treated banking badly, much worse than Europeans. And that has a history that goes back to Jefferson and his distrust of financial institutions, and the fact that finance was regulated at the state level, and heavily regulated and controlled, and big banks were really hated, and you can see that today in Wall Street. And a lot, ATMs were far more popular first in Europe and then showed up in the US. Like ATMs, the US was way behind the rest of the world. Chips on credit cards, electronic payment systems are much more advanced in China and in Europe than they are in the US. So when it comes to consumer finance, Europe is way ahead of the United States. Is there any fundamental difference between guilds like what's in Europe versus the labor unions we have here in the United States? I mean, I don't know about guilds, but labor unions in Europe are far more, typically, are more powerful than they are today in the United States. So they have more political power, they have more protections in law, and therefore they have more impact on the employer-employee relationship, usually driving up wages. But there are also unions in Europe, particularly in Scandinavia. It's far easier to fire somebody in Scandinavia than it is in California. Far easier to fire somebody in Scandinavia than it is in California. I have talked to people who live there. Products are cheaper and make 3x as much as in BE. I have no idea what that refers to, but it's more expensive to live in Europe generally. They make a lot less money, and in a income-adjusted manner, the standard of living is lower than it is in the United States. Have you ever been skydiving? No, I never will. I actually have an irrational fear of heights. I don't even like flying in airplanes. I do all the time, nonstop, but I don't like it. I overcome my fears, but I definitely have a fear of heights, which I developed as a kid at the post office tower in London, of all places. Weird. No idea why. London is very expensive. But and you know, in Germany, different places are different expense. But again, when you adjust income to expense, the United States is much better positioned than Europe. I mean, particularly if you don't live in San Francisco or in New York or in LA, right? Particularly if you live in the middle of the country, right? I mean, it's cheap. The U.S. is particularly cheap. Rothbard commented that the move in Ayn Rand started was cultish. Why would he have thought that from your perspective? Well, a number of things. One is because he would do anything, say anything, lie about anything in order to dismiss Ayn Rand. That was one of his goals in his writing, and he admitted that later on. I mean, he lied about her thoroughly. He wrote a play about her that was disgusting and filled with lies. He was a hater, and he hated Ayn Rand, so he would say anything about it. Second, he was kicked out, that is, from a close association with Ayn Rand. He had a massive disagreement with Ayn Rand around his subjectivism and around his subjectivism with regard to religion in particular. And she dismissed him, and he would never forgive her for that. So the fact that he was dismissed by Ayn Rand from her, if you call it, inner circle, he viewed that as cultish. No, I mean, he was just as cultish as anybody in that sense, because he dismissed lots of people, and including Ayn Rand. So in that sense, yes. Rand didn't force her artistic preferences on others as alleged. When her preferences differed from others, they felt judged and couldn't handle it. Yeah, I mean, I don't think she forced artistic preferences on others, but she did question those preferences. So if you liked a movie she didn't like, she'd ask you, why did you like it? What did you like about it? What was it? She forced you to analyze it, to think about it. And she challenged you. And that might have changed your mind about a particular movie or particular painting, or might not have. If you like, but it depends also on the level of difference, right? Leonard Peikoff describes, I mean, he loves operetta, and Ayn Rand loved operetta, and she introduced him to operetta. But they used to like different parts of the operetta. And different operettas have different musical styles, if you will, within them, right? So there'd be a fast, happy, kind of, too bad I don't have an example with me, but she would love that. She would conduct that. And then the more romantic, melodic, if you will, was something Leonard liked. It wasn't like she would criticize that. She would, that's a reflection of what appeals to you and what appeals to me. But both were good art. But if you liked something she considered bad, she would let you know. And she would question you about it. She would force you to think about it. She would force you to articulate what it was that you liked or disliked about something. Thoughts on early American capitalism versus Marx-era European capitalism. Seems like a good case for an individual standard of value, capitalism versus collective value. First, the United States and the UK to a large extent allowed for a kind of robust freedom that didn't really exist in most of Europe. While Europe industrialized, and there was some economic freedom in places like Germany and Central Europe and Austria and in France and other places. France maybe more than Austria and Germany. It was viewed as, I think in the UK, but certainly in the United States, it was viewed as a package with, freedom. We're free. So, yeah, of course we could build a plant there or go into this business or that business and do this or do that. In Central Europe in particular, it was viewed more, I think, as, oh no, letting these industrialists do their thing is for the social good. It's not about freedom. It's about this is good for Germany. Let's leave them alone for the good of Germany, right? So yeah, the standard value is still collectivism. The standard value is still nationalism. And there's still, big elements of central planning. So of all Europe, UK was the most individualist, still is, I think, and the most capitalist, and the most oriented towards individual freedom, individual liberty. France was behind, and Germany even further behind. And of course, the further east you went, the more further behind they went. They allowed parts of it, but primarily for collectivist reasons. Scandinavia was different. Scandinavia was much more about freedom and individualism. Late 19th century. It started late in Scandinavia. But Sweden, in particular, had a very, very free market starting in 1870. And it was focused on individual liberty and allowing people to explore and try new things and make money. And that unfortunately all changed later in the 20th century, like in the 1950s and 60s. But it had a robust capitalist market in the 19th century. Is the obsession with race in America imported from Europe? Hard to tell. Hard to tell. I mean, the original eugenics, a lot of the eugenics movement was American, and a lot of the developments in the early eugenics movement was actually the Germans were learning from the Americans in the early part of the 20th century. I think many of the notions about race came from Europe, early 19th century. The slave owners in the South were very enamored by German philosophy. They used it to justify their slave ownership. But I do think that the attitude towards racism in the past, to some extent, were developed in the United States. So Europe shared in many of those. Today, things like critical race theory, I think we're exporting to Europe. I don't think we're developed in Europe. The foundation of it, like postmodernism, was developed in Europe. Collectivism is European ideology. But its specific application of race in critical race theory, I think, is an American invention and export to the Europeans. One of the really, really bad things we're exporting. If a person pulls himself out of poverty, others will attribute it to luck. Can these people not stomach the idea that they could have done it to sell the same? No, they can't stomach that idea. And of course, what makes it really ugly and disgusting is that the intellectuals are the one telling them that it was luck. It's Sam Harris, in a sense, telling them it was luck. It's John Rawls telling them it was luck. It's the leading intellectuals of our day telling them it was luck. So I don't blame the common people. I blame the intellectuals who are feeding them this stuff. The people should know better. Would Bernie have gotten the quality of care when he had his heart attack in this type of system he thinks we all need? No, of course not. Now, he might have because he's well connected. He might have because he's got money. He might have flown to a Caribbean island where maybe they still had private health care or something. But no, of course not. Not if he was just Joe Bernie Sanders schmo, right? But because he has connections, he might have gotten good health care, even in a socialized healthcare system. But over time, that system would deteriorate. So no, overwhelmingly, the answer is no. You said that all schisms were justified. Well, all the schisms that I know of were justified. That's why I support them. But can you see how that blanket statement might itself make others at AOI feel hesitant to criticize you? Look, I don't want to speculate on why, and I don't think you should speculate on why people maybe don't want to criticize me. I think we should ask them. You should ask them, maybe behind my back, and let me know if they're afraid to be denounced by me. I doubt that's the reason. I doubt that's the reason. But you should ask them rather than all of us speculating about it. I don't think that's the reason. And I think most of the people who work at AOI know why the schisms happened and understand why the schisms happened and understand that it's not mere disagreement. Because one of the things we did at AOI, so here's a point worth making. One of the things we would do at AOI is we would take a topic and discuss it among the intellectuals. And we would disagree. And they would see Onkar telling me I was wrong. I was full of it. And me thinking about it and arguing with Onkar, maybe coming to agree with him and maybe not. And me telling Alex Epstein when he was there that he was full of it. And him telling me that, that kind of exchange happened. Disagreements, arguments, but usually some kind of resolution because we're rational people. So they saw me changing my mind. They saw me disagreeing. They saw people talking to me or disagreeing with me. And so I don't think that's the case. I mean, partially look, most people at AOI don't even listen to most of my shows. And it takes time to critique somebody, and it's effort. Why is far left blaming climate change instead of the truth about civil conflicts in the Middle East? I don't understand the question. So you're saying that they're blaming climate change for the conflicts in the Middle East because they want you to think that climate change is the most important issue in the world and that it is shaping the way the world is seen. And if their view of climate change as catastrophic is true, then you would expect an increase in conflicts in areas that are particularly hurt by climate change, like deserts or Africa. But the reason they're doing it is not that. There's no science behind it, those claims. They're doing it because they want you to believe that it is everything, that it is the most important thing in the world, that it is determining the fate of humanity right now. I posted The Milkmaid and the Pail. That is a painting by Vermeer. I admire the girl for wanting to make money, but others call her second-handed. She wanted people to envy her. Why? I don't get that. I don't get that. I just think, now I think that's what, maybe I'm missing what The Milkmaid and the Pail is. Maybe you're going to have to tell me what The Milkmaid and the Pail is. I'm going to write that down and look it up. I thought you were talking about a painting, but maybe not. Somebody says cathedrals are beautiful. Yeah, I don't like cathedrals particularly. I find them as oppressive symbols. And, the Vatican, all of these cathedrals, they're just this. I mean, I appreciate the architecture of the time, but when you think about the blood, sweat, toil, money, when there was no money that went into this, it's a disgusting display of megalomania and oppression and slavery, and it's just disgusting. Okay, I heard someone say that their business was oil and gas, but their investments were in renewables as a hedge. Thoughts? I mean, I understand why they would do it. I don't blame them for doing it. You've got to hedge. If you put all your eggs in one basket in the world in which we live, and the political winds change, you can get nailed by that. Now, I prefer to see them fight for the oil and gas business, but I understand people hedging their bets, particularly if they're not philosophical. I think there would be a lot of value in Khan Academy-style online education taught by objectivist intellectuals with regular subject like finance. I agree. Do it. Find those objectivist intellectuals and do it. I do my shtick. I am kind of tapped out in terms of what I can do. If I did this full-time and I said, okay, what do I need to do online full-time to make a living off this, to really build a business out of this, then I would diversify and do some Khan Academy-style stuff, some what I do today, some other things I would do, but I just don't have the time, given that I do other stuff. How did you answer the question about what makes you different when you made your fund? Investors keep asking me this question, and I'm wondering how to improve my answer from an objectivist view. Well, you shouldn't think of it as an objectivist view. You should just think of it as objectively what makes you different. And what made us different was, again, I can't say too much, but the deep sector expertise, the academic research, we had a lot of experience before we brought in the fund, so a certain history of doing the same thing in another format. So you just have to think about objectively, in reality, in fact, what makes you different. It's not your objectivism. It's something about how you manage it. You could say, we're more objective. We look at reality. We don't let emotions dictate. That's okay, but you better have specifics about how that applies. Or Milkmaid and the Pail is a fable. The girl wants to make money so people can envy her. Yeah, that's horrible. That is completely second-handed, right? So if you want to make money for the purpose of other people envying you, that's completely second-handed. That is not moral or right or good. It's not a good motivation. It's placing other people ahead of you. It's making them your primary focus. I've always been curious about the world. I find people are losing their curiosity about life. I think particularly with COVID, I think that's true. Yeah, me too. I'm curious about the world. I'm curious about other countries. I'm curious about other cultures. I love traveling. I know so many objectivists who don't want to travel, who think if the United States is it. As if there's nothing else in the world worth seeing. And that's so weird. Narrow. Provincial. There's so many beautiful and interesting and fascinating things out there, people out there, cultures, cultural phenomena. America's not perfect, and it's not all encompassing. Far from it. So there's great value outside the U.S. So I encourage everybody to travel, everybody, including getting a perspective that's different, so that you appreciate the United States more. Yeah, but curiosity about everything, about the reality, the world, the stars, everything surrounding you it makes all the difference between somebody who's a thinker, somebody who's engaged with the world, somebody who's alive, and somebody who's dead inside. If you don't have curiosity, you're dead inside. Could you do a rebuttal of the YouTube Knowing Better recently detailed but very biased video on Rand and libertarianism? I started watching the video. First of all, it's long. I'd have to rebut almost everything in it. Even the biographical stuff he skews in weird, and he says falsehoods in kind of weird things. And you can't just do part of it, because then people assume the rest is okay. So I don't know how to do it, is my answer. I don't know how to do it. But if you guys think it's a value, then maybe I'll try. Maybe I'll try. I'll look at it. I'll look at it again. I got like 5 minutes in, it was like, even the biographical stuff was ridiculous. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. What day is it today? Thursday. I might be doing a show tomorrow because I can't do one on Saturday. So I might do a show tomorrow and then on Sunday. So be on the lookout for a show tomorrow at 8 p.m. I will let you know. And yes, we are doing a show tomorrow. We're doing Atlas Shrugged tomorrow. So definitely tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So that's a positive show. On Atlas Shrugged, let the world know. Let your friends know. But there will be spoilers. So if you haven't read Atlas Shrugged, don't come. Don't come. If you haven't read Atlas Shrugged. See you tomorrow.